Have you ever heard about the cult of heroism? Well, today we're going to talk about that. What exactly is the cult of heroism? And where do we observe this, especially in contemporary history? Now, this is not to be confused with the cult of personality, which is in a way part of the cult of heroism, but this is something a little bit different, and is something that we can observe primarily in the Soviet Union. Before we can look through some examples of the cult of heroism, let's understand exactly what it is. The best book that I can recommend for this is called Propaganda State in Crisis. I'll leave the link in my description. The first thing we need to understand is how this differs from the personality cult. In the personality cult, which we have seen with many figures, and I'm going to be talking about later on in case of more modern events. But the personality cult, we see a personality being used and led to apotheosis, but I'm gonna make a video just about that you can find later on in this channel. But the cult of heroism goes a little bit further in the sense that it's not only about personalities, but it is about providing mass audiences with role models to identify with and emulate. So why is the USSR, the Soviet Union, such a great example of the cult of heroism? Because thanks to propaganda posters of those days, we can see this very clearly. Now, in the cult of heroism, official emphasis is placed on a class-based imagery with such a fervor that it came to govern the idiom within which Soviet propagandists worked. In the cult of heroism, we're talking about the collective rather than simply the individual. We're talking about a group of people. We're talking about heroes in the plural, so several figures that can come and combined can create an image. As we can see in some of these posters, and we're going to be looking at several of them, the cult of heroism doesn't focus on one individual that is famous or known like a national leader or anything like this, but random faces that could belong to anybody, including the person looking at this piece of propaganda and identifying with the character portrayed in this image. So the cult of heroism shows us that it can be any man or woman within the nation. As we can see in this clear image, we have a representation of several different parts of society that the individual can integrate, not only in the masculine side, but also the feminine. In no country is the cult of heroism, or at least in my opinion, looking back at the last 100 years of history, in no country has this been more used than throughout the Soviet Union years, starting from the 1930s, and in my opinion, standing until the end of the Soviet Union. So why was this such a success in the Soviet Union, and why was it employed? The book Propaganda State in Crisis describes to us that it wasn't enough to just employ the cult of personality for Lenin and for Stalin, but something else was needed that went beyond just the focus on materialism and class. There was a need to popularize the official line by directing greater attention toward the human experience of socialist construction. So because the whole idea of the Soviet Union was to promote the idea of socialism and communism, what they needed was something that portrayed the human experience as positive in a collective sense. Something that embodied the ideological values and priorities held by society as a whole. And this is one of the reasons why Soviet propaganda had such an impact into the minds of Russians to this day. And we're going to talk more about this when I make a video looking at Putin. So these heroes of the cult of heroism, in turn, could convey a sense of Soviet identity and class consciousness to the reading public at large, personifying the revolution and socialist construction with badly needed role models. And this also explains to us why even to this day the people of Russia have such a strong sense of identity, of nationality, that you don't find in every single country. The book itself gives us some examples of this, as we can see here in this poster titled Heroes of the Soviet Union. This is from 1934. We see several characters here, right, and different activities being done that promoted a sense of power for the collective. Another great example is on the next page. This one says the hero of the Arctic. Again, a person that could be anybody, so the masses can envisage, they can identify their faces into these faces, that will then do something that will bring great pride to the nation, again promoting the sense of the collective and promoting the idea that socialism, which is already an idea that prioritizes the collective over the individual, is a good idea. Again, I'm not saying that it is, right? But I'm saying that this is what the Cult of Heroism was trying and succeeded in portraying. So, to explain a little bit further why this is successful, we're going to look at Edward Bernays and his book called Propaganda. Again, I'm going to leave the link for you to buy this in the description of this video. So Edward Bernays tells us on chapter 4, the psychology of public relations, that there is a special kind of public for propaganda, that is the man in the group. Now, of course, we have society as individuals and as collectives, so this will make a difference in the kind of propaganda that you're going to use to provide your message. The group has mental characteristics distinct from those of the individual and is motivated by impulses and emotions which cannot be explained on the basis of what we know of individual psychology. So the individual is more likely to look at things with rationality rather than feelings and emotions. However, the public, the masses, they tend more into looking at things and making decisions based on emotions. The group mind does not think in the strict sense of the word. In place of thoughts, it has impulses, habits, and emotions. In making up its mind, its first impulses are usually to follow the example of a trusted leader. This is why we still see in the Cult of Heroism the use of leaders, of course, because the Soviet Union could not function without a leader. We saw this not only with Stalin, but Andropov. And I do not mention Lenin because Lenin died before the Cult of Heroism was really applied. So Andropov is also a great example, and I hope to make a video about him in the near future. When the example of the leader is not at hand and the herd must think for itself, it does so by means of cliches, pet words or images which stand for a whole group of ideas or experience. So in the Soviet Union, because obviously you had a human figure that could die at any time, you couldn't rely solely in the cult of personality because that personality could then die. You had to rely on the cult of a collective, of several heroes that would be replaced with time and would constitute the whole group of heroes of the Soviet Union. By playing upon an old cliché or manipulating a new one, the propagandists can sometimes swing a whole mess of group emotions. It is chiefly the psychologists of the school of Freud, and remember, Freud was actually the uncle of Edward Bernays, but I am gonna make a video just about him soon. According to the school of Freud, who have pointed out that many of man's thoughts and actions are compensatory substitutes for desires which has been obliged to suppress. This is interesting to mention because if you look at the psyche of the Russian population even before the Soviet Union, we saw the power of the Romanovs for 300 years. And the Romanovs, because Russia was the greatest empire at the time, the Romanovs had incredible wealth and power. So for the whole of these 300 years, the average Russian person was seen as a peasant with not many rights of land, of wealth, or of an expression in the public opinion. Therefore, and again, I think that the time of the Romanovs was still better than the time of the Soviet Union, and I will explain this later on in another video, but still, the collective thinking of the people was that they really didn't have a chance to be heroes. So of course, this is why the Cult of Heroism played so well, because the people now had a new chance, per se, to pursue the average public man and woman to be seen as heroes of the nation, rather than before the entire focus was pretty much into members of the aristocracy, members of the Romanov. So Russia is a very unique case when we look at the mass psychologist because of its background, the harshness of its empire, and what this meant throughout the years of control that the Soviet Union and communist ideologies had throughout the 20th century. So let's look at some more examples of these posters that show the Cult of Heroism. This one is a great one. We see here the man, obviously a young enough man that could just be newlywed and have a small child, here ready for a war, and behind him we see a representation that could be two things. It could be Mother Russia, but it could also be a wife and her son. So this has several interesting elements that make allusion to a prosperous future, a nice, lovely future with your family. So this is a very good example of the average man being a hero. This is the same we see here, right? And we know that the Soviet Union during those days had some of the best innovations and the best scientists, and this is partially because of the cult of heroism that promoted people to work in the benefit of the collective, of the nation, for the pride of the nation. This is another great example, right? The hero here receiving a sort of, being praised by children. This is another very interesting example because here we don't even have faces, we just have figures that show a continuity, that show that everyone is equal within the group, and this therefore fights against what people maybe felt oppressed for before, where somebody like the Tsar saw himself as above the people. Now all the people are within the same group, and this is in a way refreshing to folk who were highly uneducated and were looking for a better way of life. Now, of course, the Russian people did not have a choice, did not have a say in what happened during the times of the Soviet Union, but it was them that caused the revolution that took the Romanovs out of power and brought in this whole new system. Again, another great example of just a copy and paste pretty much, because that's what the people felt was the way. Here we have another random hero, and it continues throughout a lot of these posters. Some of the most popular political posters in those days also show the exact same thing. And this is also went very well with spatial exploration at the times, as Yuri Gagarin was seen as a massive hero, and anyone in those days, what the propaganda was showing is that anyone could have been somebody like Yuri Gagarin. They didn't have to belong to a specific family or so. Even if that's not true, that's what the people thought because of these propaganda posters and radio, whatever else they used. This is a great example of the use of mixed elements of cult of personality and the cult of heroism. Here we have Lenin that embraces the cult of personality, and here we have the Russian or Soviet people at the time that embraces the cult of heroism, the collective of all these heroes that together with the main personality of the story would create this utopia of Soviet Union, or so they thought. Here we have another great example, the couple, the family unit, the average worker, male, female. This is a great one because you can see the happy expressions in their faces and the bright colors. So yellow is a color associated with happiness, the same way blue is a color associated with trust, and then we have white, that is also a positive color associated with peace, and of course the red color linked to the colors of communism. This one is also a great one, of course, communist color in the background, but here we have, look how many hands of average men and women. So as we have seen, there are great examples of the cult of heroism throughout propaganda posters in the Soviet Union, and we can also see them actually on the commercial posters. I have a collection of Soviet commercial posters where I'm going to show you, as in this one that is promoting cigarettes. We can see the average hero, right? Somebody, of course, most of the times the main element, besides factories and labor, was linked to the military. So you have your average hero here. His expression is a serious one that gives you the impression of power, impression of authority, combined with the color blue that gives you the idea of trust, and the element of the cigarette that combines this, that brings together like the cherry on the cake of, look at me, I have power, I have authority, I am a hero of the nation. So this was a great way to sell cigarettes. I hope you have enjoyed this video. If you would like to see more content like this, please leave in the comments. I will be making more videos about propaganda, about the cult of personality that I'll be bringing to you soon. So please stay tuned. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Thank you, and see you next time.